Okay, and we are live. Okay, a very good morning to you all. Thank you all for joining us this Wednesday morning. My name is Gronje Rietveld. I am on the Google for Education team, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. We had signups from all around Europe. We had signups from the UK, from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from Turkey, from Spain. So thank you all so much for being here, for joining us today. I would like to welcome and introduce Julien Blanchez, who is Google's global security and compliance expert. So we're really delighted to have him here with us today. Before I pass off to Julien, I just want to remind you that in your calendar invitation, there is a link to a document where you can add questions. You can also add comments underneath the YouTube video that you're watching right now. So please feel free to add any questions that you have. And once Julien is finished, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I'll jump back in then and make sure that we ask all your questions directly to Julien. So thank you very much. Julien, I'll pass over to you.
Yes, good morning, everybody. So yes, my name is Julien Blanchez. As my accent betrays, I'm a European citizen. I'm Belgian actually. I've been working the last 9 years for Google, and the last few years in California, where I was working alongside the security teams there. So I'm happy to be here today and share with you what these security teams are all doing to protect your data and your students' data. So we'll cover what the security teams do, the great directions that we take from a technology point of view. We'll also cover today the tools that we put at your disposal to keep control over that data. Once you have put it into the cloud, how do you keep control over all that, and how do you remain compliant? I must say, I also have a hidden agenda when I accepted to do this webinar. I'm just back from Silicon Valley, where I had a family of 3 children there who have been enjoying for several years the pleasure of almost paperless education, and they're now very happily settling back in Europe. But they tell me very regularly about the difference between the two systems and how collaboration was, in this paperless world, and how much more effective, for both educators and for themselves, it was to study on such a technology platform. So anything I could do to help facilitate and accelerate technology adoption in Europe, I was happy to contribute. So that was my personal. So to quickly go over what we are trying to achieve in the first section of this presentation, I'll be talking more about technology, how technology evolves more first from a threat landscape. What is happening on the threat side? What do we see from a Google point of view? And what are the dangers that we have to protect you and your students against? And secondly, how we do this. What are the technology directions that we are taking to raise the bar against these rising threats? At the end of this section, you should be in a better position to decide for yourself about that big question of the cloud and security. Is it more secure to put your data in the cloud, or is it more secure to keep your data under your desk, under your school desk, if you want? So you know already where I want to lead you. So, but hopefully you can still. I leave you enough room, to make the decision for yourself. So this will be the first section. Secondly, we'll spend a few minutes on describing the tools that we put at your disposal to keep control over the data. In order to benefit from all the security that we put up, that we have built, you will need to put this data onto a public cloud system. So you will need to build a certain level of trust to do that, and we give you tools for that. There are technical tools, there are legal tools, so we'll cover these tools, and we will see how these tools enable you to remain fully compliant, also in Europe, to use these tools. If I manage my time well, I will also be sharing a few tips and other tools that we use at Google every day. So these are small pieces of technology that we use every day to keep our own systems very secure. All of these that I will cover, you can actually use for yourself personally on your own Gmail account. Right away, you can actually, these are all things that you can do within the coming hour to increase your security, and I'm pretty sure quite a few of them will significantly improve your security. If you decide that you want to apply that level of security to your organization, this is of course why we are here to talk, and how these things can be applied at scale to your organization. So these are the three parts of this presentation. So to start, what do we see happening technologically on the threat landscape? Well, the first big advantage that Google has from a security point of view, as opposed to more traditional players, I would say, is the fact that Google has about 7 to 8 products that are over 1 billion users worldwide. So from Google Search, of course, which has close to 2 billion users, Google Maps, Android, which has 1.4 billion devices now active in the world, Gmail, that has passed the billion user a couple of years back. All these platforms allow us to see very, very much in depth what is happening on the threat landscapes on the different areas of the online world. So many might be thinking, when I share this kind of information in the financial sector, people say, yes, but Google is more of a consumer organization. You don't have the needs and the requirements of the financial sector. Well, think twice. With Google Play, which has over 1 billion users too, we have to handle all the payment constraints. With Gmail, that is being used by thousands of healthcare providers worldwide, would they be hospitals, doctors, or healthcare practitioners, Gmail has to comply with all the healthcare regulations around the world. So we are faced with all these different requirements worldwide, and we put up with it to be able to provide that platform. On the other hand, we are also very exposed on all of these areas, and we are being, tested daily by the bests, and our systems are defending your data every day against the most significant attacks, and we learn every day from this. And because we are so exposed, we are able to, integrate that information immediately into our systems. And the bad news of all that is that we see a lot of what is happening, and the bad news is that there is a lot happening all over the place. So attackers are of all kinds. Would they be lone wolves, all the way to nation states? And here it is worthwhile keeping in mind that for Google, every attacker is of the same kind. And if we take the example of the nation states, for example, we have to defend ourselves against all states, or defend your data against all states. So, which requires us really to make sure that the data can be protected all over the world, and not only for one state, protected more for one state or another. So this is very important to keep in mind as we go in the presentation, and I will come back to that. The technologies are evolving very fast, and some of them are existing since a long time, but are enabled by new developments, and we will cover a couple of those later on in the talk. And they are looking at all sorts of goals. Would they be ransomware, locking your data and then asking you for a ransom, or simply disrupting your operations? So out of all that bad news and complexity of the threat landscape, there is some clarity coming from public numbers, actually, and some of these are extracted from a public report. And if you're interested into security and privacy, I highly recommend that you read regularly the Verizon data breach report. It's one of the many that is published, but it's actually one that gives you a good overview of the evolution of the threat landscape. And some of the figures that are published in there tell us very interesting things about where we need to focus today as a technology supplier to protect your data and really tackle the weakest link in the chain first. The first very interesting piece of information is that 99% of the successful exploits have been using vulnerabilities that was published more than a year ago. And what does that say is that the user, would it be you, me, or your administrator, has taken too long to update and to patch its system, its operating system, or some of the vulnerabilities present on its within its domain, and therefore has left your environment at risk. And this is like 99% of the exploits taking place. The second piece of information is that 63, so 2/3 really of all the incidents use at some point or another login credentials, so passwords and logins and passwords that have been stolen elsewhere or that have been acquired, through specific one-to-one techniques. If these passwords, if you're still relying today on a login and a password to protect your information or your students' information, it is time, with your New Year's resolutions to change tack and raise the bar, because if you solve this, and we will go over some tools to solve this, you will get rid really of 2/3 of the risk. And acquiring these passwords is actually very easy today. The Verizon report mentions a number of 12% success rates of phishing emails. So which means that, it really takes less than 9 emails or to be sent to your organization to be 100% sure that you have acquired one access point into your network. And this is actually a very conservative number. We have conducted with Google our own research with the University of San Diego a year and a half ago, where we saw that a very advanced phishing page, very well crafted, had actually 53% chance of being clicked upon. And so this means that actually a very advanced attacker needs to send less than 3 emails to your organization to gain access. So what does that tell us is that it is important to build security that makes it easy for the user. Would it be your administrator? We need to take out the complexity from the administrator's task, because protecting these environments has become extremely complex. So as a technology provider, we see it as our task really to offload the security burden from your administrator and really take care of this security. For the user, we need to build security that is both either very natural to use, and we will see, security keys, for example, that we use at Google. We've been using keys for 4,000 years. It's very natural gesture, to lock your home, to lock your car, and you can lock your data also. Or even security that works into the background and that you don't even see take place. We don't sell security. We don't make an extra margin on security, so we don't need you to see it necessarily. We just want to be sure that your data is very safe. So how have we built these defenses to date that you can benefit from out of the box, really? So we have built these technology, this security technology, first for ourselves. So this was to protect our own operations. But because when you enter, in a relationship with Google, your data is hosted on exactly the same system as our own system. So these are not separate systems. So you benefit from exactly the same protection that we provide for ourselves, or that we provide for our very large corporate or public sector customers, or our billions of users. All benefit from exactly the same level of security. So that's what I want to describe now, what we do to protect all that in your data. But before I go into explaining how we defend ourselves, I want to play a little mental game with you, trying to break the ice across the web here. So I want you to visualize yourself. Basically what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask you 5 questions. I'm going to ask you to stand up mentally, so you don't have to do this in front of your screen, but think that you're standing up. And I'm going to ask you 5 questions. If you respond yes mentally to this question, you can stay, virtually standing. If you respond no, you need to sit down. At the end of the 5 questions, if any of you is still standing up, I would love you to signal yourself through the interactive window and let us know who you are. It would be interesting to possibly reward you. So are we all standing up? Yeah, mentally at least. So how many of you or did you, sorry, do you care? Do you need to respond yes or no? So do you care about security and privacy online? I think all of you respond yes to this, so you're all standing. Did you in the last year visit the privacy settings page of Google or Facebook or any of the large social networks or cloud providers and make at least one change to the privacy settings? Okay, so if you did, you stay standing. Then how many of you activated 2-step authentication on all of your main, most strategic accounts that actually offer that capability? All right. So how many of you are using a password manager to make sure that you never reuse the same password on different accounts and that all your passwords are long enough and complex enough that they can't be easily guessed? Are you using a password manager? Yes, you stay standing. If you're not using a password manager, you can sit down. And last but not least, are you using today a hardware token, as an additional level of security above passwords and above login? And I'm not talking about, a PIN code that you receive through SMS, which is not secure enough anymore these days. If you are, you can still standing. So I think this gives you an idea of where we want to bring you and where we think it is actually necessary today to be to protect your information online. So going over to Google now, over the past 18 years, Google has arguably built one of the largest and possibly one of the most secure computing platforms in the world. If you have to picture it for yourself, Google, just the core of Google, the search engine. I'm not talking about the alphabet world of driverless cars and balloons in the air beaming Wi-Fi to the earth. Just the core of Google is today 2 billion lines of code, on which 25,000 engineers interact daily and make 45,000 change requests per day. So to give you an idea of the complexity of the system that is handled today. And the way we are capable of handling this complexity is firstly through automation. So this does not rely solely on human capabilities. So there is a lot of machine learning and a lot of machines, processing this complexity. But the second component is homogeneity. So we had the luxury to start from a blank slate, all these years back, and we do not have to cope with the complexity of layers and generations of technology that have been, creating incredible complexity and that are making literally impossible to defend these days. A legacy system today for which you have to take care of different generation of operating systems, different types of machines that you don't always control the origin of, has become very, very difficult to defend. Because we built our technology ourselves. Google is one of the largest manufacturers of hardware these days, just for our own purposes. And because we keep control over the entire stack, from the chips of the servers that we manufacture for ourselves, all the way to the network, all the way to the user interface of your mobile phone, we have this control, and we are able to keep this homogeneity. This allows us to detect incidents very fast, and most importantly, it allows us to react very effectively, because we only have one solution, or a smaller number of solutions to bring for a given incident that has taken place. The second thing that we have been able to do, and that we've been building from the start, is applying very advanced computer capabilities to this platform. And I try not to use that word too much these days because it's very hyped, but from the start you have to think of Google as a machine learning organization. What we do is we let machine learn from all the information that they can gather on us. And a very concrete example is the what we call the war on spam. If you've been using email since the 90s, such as I was, you will remember that in the 90s, spam was so threatening that it was actually putting in question the usefulness of that tool. You would receive so much spam, you didn't know if email would even survive. If you're a Gmail user today, you probably have less than 0.1% spam in your inbox. And the reason for this is because Gmail has been learning what matters to you and has been filtering spam versus not spam, and deliver with an incredible level of accuracy, what needs to come into your inbox and what should not come into your inbox. Spam being one of the main vectors of distribution of malware, this is a significant win. And this is really due to the capability to apply, these machine learning algorithm to all things that we do. The second thing about this technology platform is really its global aspect. So more than 15 data centers, of which the location is publicly known, located all across the world. Close to 70 edge location where we store, the most often required information to make sure that it reaches you at very high speed and with very low latency, and really hundreds of thousands of miles of our own fiber, that connects our data centers across the different continents, with undersea, transoceanic cables that we actively take apart into bringing down on the bottom of the ocean. And this really allows us to do several things. The first is it decreases latency, and this is absolutely essential when you talk about a collaboration platform where the least millisecond of wait, in a change in document when you're collaborating at 3 or 4 people on the same document, becomes a real hindrance in the experience. And this is the capability that we have there is critical to achieve that experience. Most importantly, though, because we have our own network infrastructure, it allows us to diminish the risk, and we avoid having to go onto others, network capabilities, and having our traffic go pass onto too many other, suppliers, and we are therefore able to contain the risk and make sure that our data, remains very protected on our own systems. A third important direction that we have taken to protect your information and our own operations has to do with a very long-standing principle in the world of security, and this principle is called the security perimeter. All security professionals have been working very hard at building these security perimeters around organizations. And these are layers of firewalls and proxies that mainly have as job to filter the information and make sure that no traffic enters into the security perimeter without the appropriate permission. This has been increasingly difficult to achieve due to the fact that your users, your students, are several times per day now hopping in and out of this security perimeter. They are in the school for a few hours, but they're doing their homework outside, and they are collaborating with, other students from other universities or other schools. And it's the same, as you can imagine, for employees of large corporations. So this security perimeter has quickly become comparable to the shell around an egg. And once you're able to crack through the shell, you can penetrate inside the systems and stay there for as long as you want, basically. And we see that typically organizations of all kind, public sector, of private sector, have threats and vulnerabilities in their systems for month and month and month before being detected. So this leads us to the second important understanding here, is that defending yourself against the outside is very important, but very often the threat comes from the inside. So how did we set ourselves up to protect ourselves against inside threats? And you have to think of, again, this control that Google has, and that we are really quite unique in over the entire technology stack. So from the chips on the boards of our servers that we design ourselves, to the operating systems of our servers that is customized and really, hardened to only provide the service that are needed for our own purpose, all the way to the storage, and the how we store your data, and we'll go more into detail about this. How we deploy our applications, and how all this is being encrypted, all the way to your mobile devices that we also define the security of, and we're able to control the security of, are very much under control. So maybe just to go more in detail over the storage layer, because this is often the question, like, how do you store my data, and how is it really protected once it is inside your system? It is you have to think of you picture yourself typing an email or typing into any of the documents, and before you even send that email that you've been typing, the information that you have captured on your page has been chunked into very small data, or has been cut into very small data chunks, and these data chunks have been dispersed over several servers. They have also been replicated across different servers, and always over different data centers. And quite often these data centers located at different places around the earth. And that is really at the moment that you are typing. Every single of these data chunks is then being encrypted with its own encryption key. And the encryption key is kept very close to the data chunk so that we can decrypt that data very fast and you do not perceive anything of that. But you can imagine the complexity of handling all of these encryption keys for every single of the data chunks that are representing all of the pieces of information and even replicated across the world. So each of these encryption keys are themselves encrypted, with key encryption keys. And then we manage these key encryption keys, the second level of encryption, into a key store, and all accesses to this key store is strictly controlled by access control lists. Would they be automated services like machines requesting access to the data, or individuals requesting access to the data? Everything is very strictly logged. So this allows us to know at all time, who accesses what information, and with a very high level of accuracy. This is only encryption at the infrastructure level, I would say. How we store the information. You of course have information encrypted, at the hardware level. So the hard drive themselves are encrypted, through another level of encryption, a deeper level. And above that level, you're also able to apply your own encryption. And there are third-party solutions that allow you to apply your own encryption and keep your encryption keys if you would not trust us at all, to see any of the data that you have there. You can always encrypt your data, with your own keys using add-on tools. So this gives you a level of the depth of the security that we put in place. These are broad directions. Of course, we don't have time to go too deep into all things that we do. But what is important to keep in mind is that the amount of innovation that you have come to expect from Google today, right? From driverless cars to these balloons in the sky, beaming free Wi-Fi to areas in the world that cannot be easily connected. The same level of innovation lives in our security teams. And this has enabled us to be a consistent or constant driving force in security and making the web really bit by bit a safer place. If you're yourself in security, you will recognize many of these innovations on this timeline. And by no means are we saying that we invented these things, but absolutely for each and every one of them, we have been very active to push their adoption, and enforce sometimes even their adoption, to make sure that the level of security increase constantly on the web to eventually become this safe place that we need it to be. So we will go further into detail about some of them. The main reason why we have been able to provide this innovation is because Google has been able to address the biggest concern of chief security officers today. And this biggest concern for all chief security officers today is human resource. How do you find the individuals, the skilled workers, skilled enough and deep enough into their topic, and motivate you to come and work and protect your data? And at Google, we have over 650 of these engineers. And what is interesting about these type of engineers is that they don't even come to work for Google. They when you talk to them, it doesn't appear very important who they work for. They come to work for Dirk. They come to work for Sam. They come to work for gurus in their topics, people that have written the books on the topic that they are experts in, and they want to be part of their team, really, because they know that this is the team that is making things advance. So these are teams of researchers that stay very closely in touch with each other, and also beyond just Google. Of course, they stay very much in touch with the research community. And if there is one thing that we have realized very early, is that even 600 security engineers, is far from enough to protect, and make the entire web a safer place. And so very early on, we are very proud to have been one of the initiators of what is now known as vulnerability reward programs. So we actively engage the broader research community and ask them to test our systems, daily, and we reward them very nicely. I think the maximum reward that has been paid to date to a single researcher is $200,000, and we have paid already close to $6 million, I believe, in rewards for researchers, security researchers that have identified a vulnerability into our systems. And what is very remarkable about the way we do this is that the way we engage is very simple. I mean, many companies that do this today will send these researchers an extensive contract with very clear constraints within which they have to operate. You may attack under these hours on these systems using these tools, and if you do anything else, you have a big problem. At Google, the mail is incredibly succinct. A few lines that is being sent to researchers and say, hey, by the way, give it a try. And if you find something, don't forget to tell us, because this is the only way we can actually pay you for this. So these vulnerability reward program are not only a challenge for my English, but are effectively being very effective at helping us find any vulnerability. We collaborate a lot with alliances, and we'll go over the security keys later. I just want to say a word over Project Zero. So we have a team of experts that are entirely dedicated to putting the power, the computing power of Google's cloud platform. So you have to imagine these thousands of servers that can be, used to test and crack, other systems. So we do, test systems of some of our, colleagues on the software and the technology world, and we tell them, when we have identified a vulnerability, so that they can fix that. Now, if you have heard of this Project Zero initiative, it's because you've heard of the few moments where, the other parties have not been able, to react fast enough in the 90 days or 120 days that we give for them to react. And so there's been a little bit of friction on the web. But overall, these teams and these collaborations across companies is the way the whole industry is going, and this has been very useful for the whole industry, testing each other to be sure that our respective systems remain very secure. So I think, having said that, we have a good view of why we believe that the cloud and large cloud providers today are offering a very good option. And I'm, of course, measuring my words to remain as objective as possible here. But, when it comes to protecting data and facing the increasing level of threats happening out there online, these attackers are using the cloud, and they're using the power of the cloud to attack your data. So if you're not using the cloud to defend your data, you're probably bringing a knife to a gunfight. But it's one thing to be convinced that you can benefit from this security. It's another thing to trust the cloud provider enough to put your data or your students' data on this system. So this brings us to the second part of this talk, where I want to share more about these tools that we put at your disposal to overcome that concern that you have, and that is very, very understandable. 200 years ago, when the banking system started to develop itself, it took a long time to convince all grandmothers of these worlds to bring the money they kept under the mattresses, into the banking system. It didn't happen very quickly. So it is work in progress. Same thing 100 years ago when the electricity grid, happened. It took a long time to convince surgeons and factory leaders, and factory heads, that they did not need their own generators to provide the electricity next to their operating room. They could trust a centralized system to provide them with either, the financial security or, the electrical power to operate this. And we are very much in the same transition today. So we see it as our duty, in a way, to provide you tools to overcome that hurdle and get onto it. And of course, all of the security that we have been explaining today is available for every single person using Google today. Would you be a consumer, looking at advertising or not? Would you be a very large corporation, a large bank using our cloud system today, or would you be an SMB, or would you be a school? This is all available. But of course, for students and educators, there are extra needs that need to be put in place, because you are responsible for the protection of your students, and you also have regulators that you need to answer to. So what are the tools that we really put at your disposal for this? If there is one slide that is important, it is this one. This is the cornerstone of what makes Gmail for Education different from a gmail.com page. Okay, when you enter into a relationship with Google for Education, you enter a totally different relationship than what you would do as a consumer. You sign a contract on behalf of your organization, or somebody has signed a contract, for you, which defines a different type of roles. You gain a different legal personality, if you want, when you enter into this contract, and you are defined as a data controller. So you keep entire control over your data and how your data is being used. And the cloud service provider, would it be us or anybody else, entering into this kind of contract, is defined as a processor. And they have to process the data exactly how the data controller injuncts, or orders. And we need to prove it to you also that we do it that way, and we'll go over the tools that we have to prove that to you. And to call a cat a cat, and to make it very clear here, this is also why there is no other use of your data than the one that has been specified into the agreement. So to be clear, there is no advertising done, with the usage of data that is within the framework of a Google for Education agreement. No advertising and no other use of the data than than to deliver the service that you have signed up for and that you're engaged in. So this new legal personality that you gain is really the key here, and what makes the whole difference, between the consumer world and the education world and also the professional world. We provide you then 3 sets of tools to allow you to gain that level of trust. There are a set of tools that you can use, and that your risk manager, or your IT manager, or yourself as a responsible for the security of your data will analyze before signing the contract. So a set of tools that you receive before signing the contract, just to make up your mind, do you even want to sign these contracts? And a risk manager, a professional risk manager, knows what this information is, and we are very transparent about the location of our data centers that needs to be known. The list of sub-processors that we are using to have our systems operate. So you have their identity, and who you need to go to, in case issues could happen. The contracts are out there, publicly stated, and you can study them and analyze them before engaging. So all that information is available for you to analyze. Also, we have dashboards that let you see real time, the availability of our system. So this transparency is very much present. At the moment of signing the contract, this is when you gain control, legal control and technical control, really, over the data, and you keep that control over your data. And this is very critical for you, because this is the only reason under which you will engage into a relationship, is if you keep enough control. And in the contract are very specifically explained, the rules and the fact that you keep complete intellectual property, over the information that you put into our systems. We also define very clearly the scope, what we call the scope of processing, which I explained previously, that we do not use the data for any other purpose than the service that has been described into the contract. The portability, that you are able to leave at any given point, and export the data freely, very easily into standard format, so that you can reuse it in any other systems without any lock-in that you should rightfully be afraid of. We engage ourselves onto keeping the same level of security. Most importantly, I believe, and to address many of the concerns, we also described in the contract how we react to third-party requests of data to access your data. So in case a national jurisdiction makes a request to access your data because of possible criminal activity or other suspicions, we explain very clearly how this happens. And to put it in a nutshell, because we are a data processor, we do not intervene. We are just waiting for you to decide how you will respond to the request. So if the request comes to us, we basically inform you very quickly, and we inform the jurisdiction that they have to ask you, because you are the one that will give the order whether or not this data can be shared. So of course, there are some legal cases where the law will not enable us to warn you, but these are cases of high criminality, and it's in everybody's interest that these things are handled very effectively by the different jurisdiction. So, but in the great majority of the cases, you remain absolutely in control of what happens to the data in such cases. The last set of tools that we put to your disposal is the right to audit our systems, and at all points you have the right to check that we deliver exactly on the commitments that we have made in our contract. So through the use of third-party professional auditors that know these systems, these kind of systems very well, you're able to ask or get the information that you need to make sure that we deliver on the commitments that have been made. Now, this is all fine and well, and I'm too slow, so I need to hurry up. This is all fine and well, but it only is useful to you if this is within compliance of your organization. And it is worthwhile taking 5 minutes here on what is the compliance framework in Europe to use cloud service providers. Until today, the handling of public information, of private information in Europe is described basically by a European directive written in 1995. And what this directive says is that you may not export data outside of Europe unless the adequate safety measures have put in place. And these adequate safety measures are then described into 2 legal mechanisms that are called the safe harbor. We're called the safe harbor. We'll go into this right away, or the model contract clauses. If your cloud service providers offers either of these, there is no problem. You can export the data without any issue. Now, earlier this year, the safe harbor was invalidated by an Austrian activist, but was quickly reinstated under a new form, a more demanding form, I would say, a more compliant form, under the name of the Privacy Shield. And this Privacy Shield, Google has complied with late in the summer. So again now, based on the text of the European directive, using these 2 legal mechanisms, you're absolutely in a position to export your data outside of Europe. Now, the great news for everybody in Europe is that this directive, because it's a directive, had taken different shapes and forms into the different European countries, will be replaced by a new regulation that will be mandatory in May 2018 and has been accepted in May this year. And we basically all have a 2-year grace period to enable it into our systems. But what this new regulation does is unify the landscape across Europe. So all European countries will be abiding to the same text of law on handling private data. We'll also be using the same export mechanism. So Privacy Shield and model contract clauses still work exactly the same way as they did for the EU directive with the GDPR. So there is a lot of myth about the fact that the GDPR will require data to be located in Europe. These are myths, okay? When you use these 2 export tools, you can absolutely, export the data outside of Europe. Of course, what the GDPR also does is that it increases the responsibility of both controllers and processors on the handling of the data. It increases the power of the data privacy authorities in all countries to make sure that everything happens appropriately. And if something goes wrong, the fines are very high. So, which means that your responsibility increases also. If you decide to remain the one operating and handling the data and securing all the data, you are also very much concerned about what is happening with the GDPR. And in a way, we as a cloud service provider see the GDPR as a very good news, because everything is taken much more seriously now, and everything is also very much more easy to handle because of the unified legal landscape that is taking place. So this was about the GDPR. You don't have to wait until 2018 to benefit from the GDPR. The GDPR was not written in a vacuum, and it was very much inspired by a lot of controls and a lot of standards that were out there. And Google, like many other cloud service providers, certify for all these standards and have regular audits against all these standards. The one that is probably most important for you here is the ISO 27018 standard, which is a new standard on the handling of private information worldwide, very demanding standards for which we were one of the very first to adopt. And then, of course, we abide to a series of more vertical standards, and you see a HIPAA certification for the healthcare world in the US, and we also abide to the the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, which allows us to operate on the education market in the US, or the Children Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, which allows us to be such an important player in the education world in the US, but which I know they are not really valid in Europe, but they give you an idea that our systems, abide to the level of expectations that are necessary to provide an education service, at least in the US. So FedRAMP is worthwhile mentioning, because FedRAMP is the certification that allows us to provide our services to federal agencies in the world. So, very large defense organizations in the US use Google, to give you an idea of the level of secrecy and the level of protection that we're able to provide. We have engaged recently in achieving, European certification. So the British government has, given us an approval, to operate, and this is how, very public instances in the UK are now using GSuite and the Google Cloud Platform as a tool to operate. And the financial services sector also, there was this big mystery of, was the Google Cloud usable? But very recently, the Dutch National Bank, gave us accreditation. So these are the kind of certifications that allow, education customers also, like the Catalunya Telematic Education Network, with more than 100,000 education professionals today, to use the GSuite and Google Cloud services. A great number of universities, and I want to name, the University of Amsterdam, Groningen, University of St. Andrews, are using GSuite today, and several national research and education networks such as SurfNet in Holland or JISC in the UK have, approved the use of our systems for education network. So there is no doubt today that, a cloud service provider is compliant, or the Google Cloud is compliant to deliver education services in Europe, and it's just a question of gradually, getting into this, and even for high schools, and you might have heard of the Sollentuna municipality in Sweden, that has really driven has led the movement there in Scandinavia to make GSuite a very appreciated platform for education and it's now used by Gothenburg City or Trondheim or Malmö, to name just a few. Right, I only have 5 minutes to tell you tips and tools. I've been too long, I apologize. First, if you haven't done so, go to Google My Account and check your security and privacy settings. If you haven't done so, this is absolutely critical. You need to be aware of what you allow and what you not allow. Second, go to this page on the web. Have I been pwned? Just Google that, enter your Gmail address, and be aware how many times your own Gmail and login have been obtained by hackers through other hacks. If you were on different large social networking platform in the last years, there's a high chance that your login and passwords are available for sale today. And this makes it extremely important for you never to reuse the same login and passwords on different platforms. If you do this, if you have this habit, I highly recommend that you use a Chrome extension that is mandatory at Google. It's called Password Alert. You add this to your Chrome browser, and it makes sure that every time you use your password on a different platform than your Gmail password, than Gmail, it warns you and it forces you to change it. This has 2 advantages. A, you will not reuse your password twice. B, if you are led to a fake Gmail page, it will also tell you this is not the real Gmail page. You're about to enter your Gmail or very critical password on a fake page. This is a simple free extension. It gets rid of a lot of the threat. 3 of is it 4 already? I don't know. It's 4. Use a security key. Security keys really add an extra level of protection above your login and password. We've been using keys for 4,000 years. Keys are absolutely mandatory at Google. Every single Googler has this key. And what this key does is after you've entered your login and password, you enter this key into your USB slot, you touch it, and it sends a cryptographic signature, to the Google server, allowing you to access. It is protecting you very effectively against reuse of your login credentials. My whole family has one, and the beauty of these keys is that with one key you can have the signatures of your several children. So I have a copy of the signatures of all my kids and my wife of course as a backup of my keys, and I have 2 keys also as a backup for. So these are pretty cheap to buy on Amazon. You just Google U2F security keys or Google security keys, and you will be able to purchase one online. One of those are highly recommended. Voila. This has been a bit longer than expected. I apologize, but I think we've covered the 3 topics. First, the technology. Because we're born in the cloud, we are able to put up with these new threats in a very effective way. Second, the transparency that we put in place and the tools that we put at your disposal to gain that trust, to be able to join that movement. And thirdly, these simple tools, these natural security tools that we put at your disposal that you don't even want to know when you hear of, but that very effectively keep our systems secure for the last 18 years, and your data secure for the future, that are at your disposal. So now, if there are any questions, Brian, I'm sorry, we only have a few minutes left, but
not a problem at all. We actually have quite a few questions. Some questions came in before the session started, so when people were signing up, and some questions we have received throughout the session. So I'll just go through maybe some of the questions that we received. One that we received before the session started came from Turkey, and the question, I thought, was quite an interesting question. The question was, some websites have a sign in with Google page. Is this preferable to use, or should you use these sign in with Google pages rather than creating a new password, for example, for each individual website? What would you recommend?
Okay, so overall, these federation mechanisms offer extra security. One of the problems of security online is the repetition of different passwords, as I have described, and the complexity that it adds in the user. So if you can rely on a very strong party to provide you strong authentication, like we are definitely striving to do, but there are others out there, and then reuse these very strong mechanisms to authenticate you on other platforms, this is definitely a preferred way. So trying to simplify at the root, assuming that you're sure of the strength of the initial authentication, is definitely a preferred way to operate.
Okay. That's great. And you mentioned simplifying, and during your session you also mentioned about password managers. So there has been a question on the YouTube chat about what you might recommend. What you might recommend there. I know you've mentioned hardware keys. What would you recommend to an IT manager who's watching this now? How would you recommend that they help their students and their users protect their passwords?
So this is going to be I'm going to talk about my personal setup, right? This is not going to be that Google recommendation, because there are many opinions. But the way I operate now is I have a key. I have a security key to secure my most important accounts. Okay, so I have a security key that protects my Gmail account, where a lot of my information is stored, and this key also is used for my password manager. So my password manager is also highly protected with this hardware token. I use personally LastPass. Okay, so this is one personal choice. There are other choices, but having this other password manager allows me to have 20 characters of very complex characters, passwords of more than 20 characters, very complex passwords, on all the different web properties that I engage. And again, this password manager is then protected by my security. So this is really how I operate. Trying to rely on one very strong authentication mechanism, and trying to keep all of these different properties segregated, never reusing the same password.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. So one of the other questions that's come up in various forms on the document is around core and non-core GSuite for Education products. So can you maybe just explain a little bit about why certain products are core services and why certain products, like YouTube, for example, are not core services?
We pass these very stringent certifications for a certain number of products. Okay, so when you enter in the Google for Education agreement, we absolutely certify the security of the core services. They include the GSuite Docs and Classroom, and some kind of contacts. So the full list is available online. But these are absolutely certified. If you decide to use services that are outside of these very certified set of products, you really have to do your own risk assessment and decide how you want to protect that. But of course, the way YouTube, for example, is being used, doesn't allow for the same kind of very strict certification that we apply for the GSuite. So it's really up to you to really always have a very clear understanding of how these different tools are being used.
And just as a reminder, so the products that then would fall under core services would be then our email platform, Google Drive, Google Sites, Google Forms. So there's the most used products by schools are covered by our core services there.
Yes.
So another very interesting question, just based on the points that you were making around requests for data. So you made a point that it's not our data. You are the data controller. However, there may be situations where there is a request for data. Now, you mentioned that's in cases of very high criminality cases. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how Google responds to data requests and how we protect our users' data in those cases?
Yes. So the core, the main principle is that we always, as a first priority, protect your data. So when the request comes, we first check if the request is valid, is legally valid, if it's not too broad, if it's not, asking for too much information in view of, the case that is being made. In any case, we deflect the question to you as a controller. So you are always the one that allows for this data to be provided or not provided. In the very few cases where the law prevents us to warn you or warn the data owner that this request is being made, and you have to think of pedophilia, for example. We in these cases are not allowed to warn the suspected person that we are about to share information. We will in any case make sure that the scope of request fits with the suspicion of the case, and we will always challenge the request to make sure that it's legally viable. And that it only requests the information that is needed.
I think that's a very valid point as well, that we have our lawyers who review every request and they really make sure that it's completely compliant as well. I think that's really important. So I'm just going to wrap up on one final question, which I can take, which is from Belgium. So it's quite nice that we can end on a question from Belgium. We have a teacher who's asking about good digital citizenship and how can she help her students understand their responsibilities as good digital citizens. One thing you may not be aware of, we've got some really great resources. If you visit google.com/safety center, or just Google the Google Safety Center, you'll find there lots of resources for parents, lots of resources for teachers, resources that you can use in your classroom, resources that you can share with parents in order to help students, or even help parents, or even help yourselves understand how better you can protect your own online accounts. Great. I said it was the last one, but
okay.
There's one last question on
Go
the
ahead.
document, which Julien, I just want to ask you. There is a question here which is asking about Google's model contract clauses and the European Union standard model contract clauses, and it's asking, is there a difference between Google's standard contract clauses and the European standard contract clauses?
Yes, so there are a couple of slight differences, and the reason for that is that the model contract clauses were not written initially with cloud service providers initially in mind. All large cloud providers have come with slight amendments into the contract clauses that take into account the reality of a cloud provider. So one of them that will explain to you why this was necessary was, for example, the initial necessity in the original text to ask for consent to the millions of users, and so this is virtually impossible in the situation of a cloud provider. The intensity of the transaction there would be too high and would limit really the usability of the tools. So we have replaced this with other legal mechanisms that allow the user really to be aware of how the data is being used and have at all points the capability to get out of the system. So that these are the kind of slight modifications that have been brought to model contract clauses. Again, not only by Google, by all cloud providers. And in any case, the modifications that we have made are being reviewed and approved by the European institutions that make sure that none of the modifications contradict the initial purpose of these model contract laws. So this is why you will see slight modification on ours, but also on other large cloud providers clauses. But again, the certification by Europe is absolutely by European institution remains even after the modification remains absolutely necessary and critical.
Fantastic. I think that's a great point as well, to make sure that we know that when a school signs up and uses the model contract clauses, which you can find within your admin console, that enables you then to be in compliance. So that's really important.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so I want to thank you for your time, Julien, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today online. And thank you for all your comments and questions. Really, really important and really added to the experience. So I think we should sign off. Great.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck out there. Thank you.
Bye-bye.